Welcome to the Everything Made Beautiful podcast with Shannon Scott, where we talk about life's seasons, joyful, challenging, and everything in between, and how God is working in all of them. Join us each week for conversations filled with hope, truth, and the encouragement that He is always making everything beautiful. This podcast is sponsored by Kava, helping you take your next step in faith through digital resources that deepen discipleship. Check them out at Kava, QAVA.tv. And now, on with the show.
Well, hey friends. This is that episode. The one where I throw my hat into the ring, or maybe the brawl, of our current cultural moment. And before we dive in today, I need to acknowledge something, which is that I almost didn't record this episode. I've sat with these thoughts for a couple of weeks now, wrestling with whether to speak, when to speak, and how to speak. I've been angry. I've been grieved, sad, outraged, and exhausted. And as I've said so many times before, God has given us our feelings as faithful indicators, but they're very unreliable leaders. So I've waited, not because I had nothing to say, but because I do have a responsibility as a teacher to ensure that what I say comes from a place of conviction rather than reaction, and from wisdom rather than wounding. I take really seriously Proverbs 10:19, which says, "When words are many, sin is not absent, but he or she who holds their tongue is wise." There has been no shortage of words lately. There have been many words, and there has indeed been sin, and I want to ensure that I don't sin in my words. But I was thinking recently about September 11th, because we've just finished that anniversary, and I've been thinking about who we were in those days, and more to the point, how we were in those days. Do you remember? Republicans and Democrats wept together. Strangers helped strangers. We saw each other as Americans first, humans first, fellow image bearers facing a common tragedy. For all the horror of that day and the days after, there was something unexpectedly beautiful about how it stripped away our superficial divisions and revealed our shared humanity. But what a stark contrast that was to where we find ourselves now. I have to say, I have been deeply unsettled by what I've seen across our world and across our country in the last few weeks. The assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus by another American, and the vitriol and hatred pouring forth from humanity in response is grievous and frankly terrifying. Instead of universally uniting against the evil of violence and the loss of human life, we have somehow found ways to weaponize even this tragedy. And what really breaks my heart, beyond the American disunity after this, it is the disunity even among believers, and this should not be. I have watched as believers have attacked spiritual leaders and pastors for not speaking out enough, not speaking out early enough, not speaking out correctly, not using Charlie Kirk's name when they spoke out, using Charlie Kirk's name when they spoke out, being frauds because they didn't speak out about fill in the blank this or that, the other thing that they didn't speak out about, but they did speak out about Charlie Kirk, not being firm enough, not being graceful enough. There seems to be a really poor understanding of the mandates that pastors carry and what spiritual leadership actually requires. There seems to be a lack of sympathy for what is, in many cases, a process of shock and grief that is deeply personal to each leader, a process in which responding immediately would be unwise. Frankly, I find myself wanting to run and hide and speak up simultaneously. I've been swinging back and forth wildly with every scroll through my feeds. So let me be vulnerable with you about where I've landed. I do not watch live television with the exception of Atlanta Braves games and Florida Gator games, partly because I can't stand commercials, but mainly because it allows me to curate my environment rather than being dictated to by programmers. So I can't vote for Dancing with the Stars in real time, for instance, because I'm not watching it live. I'm watching it after the fact. I've just determined that I do not want to sit through commercials or be inundated in that way. I've also drastically limited my social media intake for the last few years. I have a 10-minute timer on Instagram and Facebook, and I have set a limit of only opening that 4 times a day for 10 minutes at a time. So literally 40 minutes a day. Enough time to check messages, post something, respond to a few comments, and be out. When that timer goes off, the app shuts down, and I have to work really hard to open it again through a series of steps. I can open it, I'm not a slave, but it's an intention for me to drastically reduce my amount of input. I'm just a way better version of myself when I don't disappear down the rabbit hole of doom scrolling. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Some would say I'm, quote, sticking my head in the sand or being avoidant rather than staying educated and informed about the world around me. But I want to offer a different perspective, and it may not be popular. I was not intended to bear the weight of the world on my shoulders. God did not design my body or yours to constantly intake a litany of headlines, sound bites, and images without end. When I do, I suffer. I think we were all created uniquely, yes, but not all that differently. When you intake unending information digitally, you suffer too. There's tons of scientific and biological research to prove it, but the toll that's most insidious is the toll it's taking on our compassion and empathy. Psalm 55:22 says, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved." Notice it says, your burden, not every burden that's ever existed. We were created to cast our anxieties on him because he cares for us, as 1 Peter 5:7 reminds us. We were not created to collect the anxieties of the entire world and carry them like some sort of digital atlas. Jesus himself modeled this kind of boundary. He didn't heal every sick person on earth in his day. He didn't attend every crisis. He withdrew regularly to lonely places to pray, as we see in Luke 5:16. So if even the Son of God with earthly skin on needed rhythms of withdrawal and solitude, how much more do we? Think about the disciples when they returned from their first missionary journey, breathless with stories and excitement about all they'd seen and done. What did Jesus do? He said in Mark 6:31, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." He knew that even kingdom work, good work, necessary work could overwhelm the human heart if taken without pause. Remember, there was a time when 24-hour news cycles didn't exist. There was a time we didn't know about tragedies until many hours or days after they occurred. There was a time when I didn't know your opinion on every little thing and you didn't know mine. There was a time when our thoughts were ours and we didn't overvalue their contribution to public discourse. That time has passed, and I think we as people are actually worse for it. For any good that social media and constant access to information has given us, and I'm not saying there isn't any, I would argue that in the final analysis, the detriment to our shared humanity and our ability to see each other as whole souls rather than flat caricatures far outweighs any gains in productivity and connectivity. In fact, the connectivity we've so achieved seems to be doing nothing to help us be more human, more compassionate, more empathetic. When everything is urgent all the time, nothing is sacred. When everyone's voice has equal volume, wisdom gets drowned out by whoever can yell the loudest. The title of this podcast, Everything Made Beautiful, as you know, comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And in that chapter, we're reminded that for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And 2 of those things are a time to keep silence and a time to speak. But in this digital age, we've created, albeit unintentionally, a culture where it's always time to speak, always time to have an opinion, always time to weigh in. In many cases, I think we've lost the sacred rhythm of listening first, pondering deeply and responding with compassion and intention. I can't help but think of Jesus standing before Pilate and how Mark 15:5 tells us he gave no answer. There's something really profound about the Son of God choosing silence in a moment when the whole world was demanding he defend himself. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. And here's another way I've felt the Spirit pressing hard against my own heart. I am grieved, but I'm actually grieved for us, not for them. Because the more I convince myself that other people are wrong, the less responsibility I have to take for my own entrenchment, my own judgment, my own critical spirit and accusations. So rather than asking, why are they like this? I think a better question is, why are we like this? It is so much easier to point fingers than to examine our own hands, right? But Jesus was unrelenting about this in Matthew 7:3. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, he said, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? He didn't say there was no speck. He said, deal with your own log first. Why have we become the people who see someone post about a tragedy and jump all over them for not posting about every tragedy that's befallen humanity in the last calendar year? Why do we glory in the demise of others if their politics and ideology differ from ours? Why do we eviscerate people? Why have we lost sight of mercy? What have we become? I think sometimes we forget that every person we encounter, online or in person, is fearfully and wonderfully made. This is Psalm 139:14. We know this. But often, I trade the uncomfortable work of seeing the image of God in difficult people for the easier work of reducing them to their worst moments, their most inflammatory takes, their most misguided decisions. Let me offer you a thought experiment. If we were all trapped in a burning building together, would we really ask people who they voted for before helping them to safety and rescue? No. In that moment, when nothing else mattered, it would all come down to our shared humanity and literally nothing else. Not our politics, not our theology, not our ideology. If everything was on fire, we'd suddenly be unified. We saw this on September 11th, 2001. And guess what? Everything is on fire again. This isn't hyperbole, this is reality. Our nation is burning with division. Our churches are burning with conflict. Our families are burning with tensions. Our own hearts are burning with anger and fear and grief. And in this fire, we have a choice. We can fan the flames with our words and our clicks and our shares, or we can be the ones who run toward the burning building with buckets of water. What if we ran toward those we disagreed with politically or ideologically or theologically first? What if we approached others with the determination to find some common ground, even if our only common ground was our shared humanity? The Good Samaritan did not check the wounded man's political affiliation before binding up his wounds. He saw someone made in the image of God who needed help, and he helped. That's it. That's the whole story. That's the whole gospel, really. I cannot say this strongly enough. We have to reject the rampant reduction of humanity that we see on every side. We cannot condone the dehumanization of others. Anytime, any place, from any voice, in any venue, for any reason. To reject the imago Dei is to reject the design of God and redefine what He Himself has already called good. Genesis 1:27 isn't a suggestion, it's a foundational truth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. Every person who breathes carries the fingerprints of the Almighty. Every single one. The person whose political posts make your blood boil, the person whose theology makes you cringe, the person whose lifestyle choices you can't understand. All of them are image bearers. When we reduce people to their voting record or their stance on cultural issues, we're essentially saying that God made a mistake in creating them with inherent dignity and worth. We're saying that their value is conditional based on their agreement with us rather than their creation by Him. So, believers in Jesus, this is on us. The church, as in the Big C church, the bride of Christ, has the hope of the world, and we've got to dispense it like there's a hope shortage and crisis, because there is. Across every denomination, every doctrinal divide, every theological debate, we must, in unity, be hope bringers, be vitriol smotherers, be peacemakers. We must. Jesus said in John 13:35, "By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Not if you have the right doctrine, not if you vote correctly, not if you post the right things on social media, if you have love. And if that's how people will know we belong to Jesus, then what are they learning about Jesus from the way we treat each other? Paul wrote to the Philippians, "Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is near." Other translations say gentleness or moderation, and the Greek word there means the kind of person who gives others the benefit of the doubt, who errs on the side of mercy, who chooses kindness even when they have every right to choose harshness. We have to be that people. We have to be the ones who break the cycle of outrage and accusation and contempt. We have to be the ones who remember that the person spewing hate online might be the same person drowning in their own pain at home. Which brings me back to why I waited to record this episode, but why I am ultimately recording this episode. I want to encourage us, me included, to be great self-leaders before we're leading others. That's why I paused before responding to all of this. Not because I didn't care, not because I was afraid to respond, frankly, not even because I didn't know pretty quickly how I felt and what I thought, but because I needed to ensure that what came out of my mouth was worth the weight it would carry. The responsibility of being a teacher, a voice, a leader, whatever you want to call it, is one I do not take lightly. James 3:1 warns that teachers will be judged with greater strictness. That should make every teacher pause before hitting post or record or publish. But frankly, that should make all of us pause. I've learned that my feelings are faithful indicators, but terrible leaders. Anger tells me something is wrong. Grief tells me something matters. Fear tells me something feels threatening, but none of those emotions should be driving the car. They can sit in the passenger seat and give me information, but they don't get to steer. Now, I know that none of you listening to the Everything Made Beautiful podcast are the ones trolling people online or attacking spiritual leaders for their timing or their tone. I know you're not the ones deciding someone's eternal worth based on whether they think revival is upon us or that we're barreling toward Christian nationalism at breakneck speed. You're not yelling about free speech. You're not canceling people. That's not you. You would never. But maybe, just maybe, even though you have all this down, maybe you know someone who could benefit from hearing this. You know, that friend of a friend or that distant cousin, that person you went to high school with who keeps showing up in your feed. Perhaps you could share this episode with them for their benefit, of course, because you and me, clearly, we've got all this figured out, right? Okay, fine. This is for all of us, me included. So, what does it look like practically? How do we position ourselves as hope bringers in a world that's on fire and languishing for hope? Well, first of all, guard your gates. Limit your exposure to the constant stream of outrage and opinion. Set boundaries on social media. Choose thoughtfully what voices you allow into your mental and emotional space. Turn off the news occasionally. This isn't ignorance, it's wisdom. Gates let us choose what to let in and what to keep in. So guard your gates. Number 2, embrace the power of the pause. If you've been around here more than 2 seconds, you knew this was coming. Before you respond to that inflammatory post, before you share that article, before you join that online argument, pause. Ask yourself, will this build up or tear down? Will this bring hope or add to the fire? Is this the hill I need to die on today? Number 3, look for the image. When you encounter someone who makes your blood boil, intentionally look for the image of God in them. It is there. It might be buried under layers of hurt and hardness, but it is there. Ask God to help you see what He sees rather than what your lens is showing you. Number 4, choose your battles. Not every wrong opinion needs to be corrected. Not every inflammatory statement needs a response. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is scroll past, close the app, and go hug your family. And back to setting boundaries on social media. In many cases, with better boundaries, you won't even see it and therefore won't feel the need to add to, amen, correct, or critique it in the first place. Number 5, be a bridge, not a bomb. When division erupts around you, resist the urge to choose sides and instead choose to be a reconciler. Ask questions instead of making statements. Listen with the intent to understand, not to formulate your rebuttal. And number 6, pray for your enemies. Jesus commanded it in Matthew 5:44, and He knew what He was doing. It is impossible to hate someone you're genuinely praying for. Start small. Pray for someone whose political views differ from yours. Pray for their well-being, their family, their peace, and watch how it changes your heart. I have to say that I do know that all this might sound naive or overly simplistic. Those of us who've been immersed in scriptural principles and biblical truth for a long time can forget the fact that though often simple and straightforward, there is true power in the words of Scripture. They're easy to understand, but often difficult to implement. But they work when we do them. I know there are real injustices to be addressed, real evils to be confronted, real wrongs to be made right. I'm not advocating for passivity or indifference to suffering, but I am advocating for a different way, the way of Jesus, who somehow managed to speak truth without diminishing dignity, who confronted sin without condemning souls, who brought hope into the darkest places without pretending the darkness wasn't real. The world is watching. They're watching to see if we really believe what we say we believe. They're watching to see if the hope we claim to carry actually changes the way we live and love and respond to crisis. They're watching to see if Jesus really does make a difference. And for those of you who are dying because I haven't given my 2 cents or personal thoughts on Charlie Kirk or the memorial or whether there's a revival brewing or whether we should be worried, here are a few personal thoughts from me. And yes, even with everything I just said, I'm nervous to share them because these days, the slightest thing can get you canceled, get taken out of context, or pulled out and isolated as a whole picture of who you are. But I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and trust that if you're listening to this, you are not that kind of person. So, thought number 1. I did not know who Charlie Kirk was until he was murdered. I was not his target audience. I didn't know what he was about. From all I was seeing, I assumed a few things after he was killed. He seemed to passionately love Jesus. He seemed to not only tolerate, but also invite oppositional views into conversation. As a public person whose primary responsibility is speaking, I have great empathy and compassion for the weight involved in always being recorded, captured, reposted, and how difficult it would be to always be perfectly calibrated on every occasion in every room with every audience. So therefore, I probably have a lot more grace than some might for things that I might not have said in the way I might not have said them when it comes to how Charlie communicated what he passionately believed. Thought number 2, I condemn in the strongest possible terms the public murder of other people for any reason, but most of all, for holding a different view than me. If we begin to exterminate one another and come to see it as normal or just, we have thoroughly and entirely lost the plot. If I can kill somebody because I disagree with them, or if someone can kill me because they disagree with me, I think we are on a fast train to somewhere we don't want to go. Thought number 3. Here's what I think about the memorial service, and I want to say that I am very familiar with large events with phenomenal worship music and preaching because these have been part of my story as an attender, participant, and producer for decades. So here are a few sub-thoughts on this from my seat and in no particular order. Anytime the gospel is preached and people respond, it is a miracle, period. May the gospel go forth in all ways and at all times, and may people be changed from an encounter with Jesus, the living God. It is a miracle of grace that the gospel went forth at Charlie Kirk's funeral and that people have met Jesus as a result. Full stop. Secondly, we have to exercise wisdom, discernment, and yes, caution when we see large groups of people respond emotionally to something. Anything from Backstreet Boys to Taylor Swift, from Wicked to the Charlie Kirk Memorial Service. And here's why. Outward expression is not synonymous with inward transformation. It can be an indicator, yes, but it is not necessarily evidence. Furthermore, and I say this with extreme respect, there was no way that it wasn't going to be amazing. Here's why I say that. Some of the greatest in their field were tapped to be part of that memorial service, all the way down to the production companies that partnered to produce it and fly LED walls and print banners and program lights and run sound. I personally know some of the production people that ran it and some of the worship leaders who led at it, and those people love Jesus. They serve him faithfully, and there was no way with the best in the business bringing their best that it wasn't going to be phenomenal. God has gifted those people specifically for those things, and those gifts were on display. I have been in rooms that large and larger for the last several decades that have been just as powerful and just as emotional. The environment was not anything especially new to many of us who are in this line of work, but it was the celebration of life, it was Erica Kirk, and it was the audience that were of particular note in this situation. A man who loved Jesus and lived out his passion was being celebrated publicly. World leaders, activists, athletes, politicians, nonprofit leaders, believers, non-believers, people were hearing the gospel clearly and then watching a grieving wife and mom profess public forgiveness. Those are things to celebrate. But transformation will not be measured in the emotion of that service, but over the long haul, in the unseen, in the repentance, in lives changed, in forgiveness multiplied, in surrender to the Savior. And we should pray that that will be the outcome of that service. But we should be careful about the mingling of messaging, about the assumption that God is on the side of a political party, or that he needs lights, camera, or LED to move in power. He needs nothing. He bows to no one. He's bigger, and he is about much more than we can possibly conceive of. So, I urge you, specifically in relation to the memorial service, to celebrate what was amazing exercise caution regarding what got mixed and mingled in, and ultimately pray for transformation as a result of the gospel going out in that way. The response to this cultural moment, if done right, should be full of nuance, temperance, and restraint. Everything is on fire, but we don't have to add fuel to the flames. We can choose to be the ones who carry water, who build bridges over the chasms of division, who refuse to let the image of God be reduced to a political position or a cultural stance. And so the question today isn't whether you agree with me. You are actually welcome to not agree with me. And that's the beauty of living here and of this being my platform and of you having your own that disagrees with mine. So the question isn't whether you agree with me. The question is, what kind of person are you going to be when everything burns? Are you going to be part of the problem or part of the hope? I'm choosing hope, even when it feels foolish, even when it feels futile, even when I want to run and hide. I'm choosing to believe that love really can cast out fear, that mercy really can triumph over judgment, and that hope really can overcome despair. Because if we don't believe that, if we can't live that, then what exactly are we offering the world that they can't get anywhere else? The fire is real, but so is the water. So let's carry buckets and not matches. Friends, I really, really, really enjoy being on this journey with you. It is one of the privileges of my life. I do not take it lightly that you would spend any amount of minutes listening to anything that I would say. I also don't claim to be an expert. I'm just passionately sharing with you what I believe the Spirit is challenging me on. So, whether you agree, whether you disagree, I do thank you for your time. I thank you for listening. And I thank you for being about the fact that God really is still making everything beautiful, even when it doesn't seem like it, even when it doesn't feel like it. And that includes you. And I will see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for Everything Made Beautiful. We're grateful for your willingness to tune in. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share today's episode. For more from Shannon, including articles, resources, and upcoming events, visit shannonsuzannescott.com. We'll see you next time.